Welcome back to Worldview Dilemma. So I think a lot of people can relate to this meme, and put themselves in the shoes of this extraterrestrial being here. When you come to Earth in search of a better life and slowly begin to grasp what the fuck's going on here. When you look out into the world and see all the injustices and all the madness, all the suffering, and when you learn about the history of humanity and all that has taken place and all the injustices and all the madness, all the suffering, right? And you look to the future, wouldn't you, well, as bad as things are, wouldn't you agree that things could always be worse for more people and likely will be unless something is done? And then the question of like, okay, but what to do about it and whose responsibility is it to do something, then those questions tend to come up, right? Because it's like there are a lot of problems, and it stands to reason that we are all responsible for the reality that we co-create and are co-creating. And a subset of the population is not going to save the rest of the population, or like the politicians are not going to save us, or God is not going to just come down and save us, though some people would disagree. And the aliens, they're not going to come down and save us. Really, no one can actually even save anyone else. It's not like anyone is just going to save you or save me or save anyone, right? No one can really heal someone else, although yes, you can certainly help. But still, when it comes to healing oneself of ideologies, dogmatic belief systems, or certain behavioral patterns that are harmful to others, when it comes to healing that kind of thing, no one can just wave a magic wand and heal someone. So it is very daunting, hence the look on this being's face. It's like there are a lot of problems, and there are a lot of psychological problems. There's a lot of insane belief systems. There's a lot of delusion. There's a lot within a lot of people's minds and hearts that would have to change in order for the world at large to change for the better. And that is very hard work, because no one can do it for another, though we can all be a positive influence, or anyone can be, but no one can just heal someone else of their authoritarian belief system without that person also willing to do it themselves and working on themselves. And then you see how often people are totally unwilling to do that work, and you really are met with you just realize how deep these problems go and how hard it is for some people to change. Now, that doesn't mean there's no hope at all, because a lot of people are not enmeshed in super harmful belief systems or clinging to them ferociously and unwilling to change. And there's a lot of people who are also basically good. And there's also, when if you do put yourself in the shoes of this being here, you also see a lot of joy. You also see a lot of beauty in the world as well. And there is also cause for hope, but there can be no denying how much healing there is also to be done, and how difficult that work is, and how so many people don't want anything to do with healing themselves. And maybe a way to kind of synthesize that is by saying, there is a deficiency in love in this world, and it's not only the deficiency in love that perpetrators of harm have towards their victims, though that's obviously a prime example, but there's also a deficiency in love when it comes to people even worshiping their abuser or supporting their abuser or apologizing for bullies. So it's not only the bully that's the problem in the world, it's the bully apologize, or the one who condones the bully behavior or supports it, even if they say they don't, but they're still feeding into it. There's also, the deficiency in love when it comes to people's own relationship to themselves, and how, if you're a perpetrator of harm against others, you're also, accruing culpability. You're also injuring yourself spiritually by perpetrating harm against others. So that too is coming from a deficiency in love towards oneself. And all kinds of ways there is a deficiency in love, and not nearly enough love present for the 8 billion people, not to mention the animals and the earth itself. So now again, it doesn't mean there's a total absence of love. Of course, love is still here, thank goodness, and otherwise it wouldn't even be worth trying to have this conversation at all. You just want the first ticket out of this planet altogether, because it's like there's absolutely zero love, right? And people are just walking around like, chopping people's heads off everywhere you go. But that's not the case, right? And some people still just, like, I was talking to a friend the other day who was saying, like, I want out of here. I don't like it here. And I want a spaceship to come and beam me up to a planet where my people are, where we live peacefully. And, like, I think a lot of people are very, of course, overwhelmed by this overall situation, and just also overwhelmed by the realization that it is ultimately the responsibility of each and every one of us to co-create a better world. And to get there from here is very daunting. And it's like, and then you try, and so many people just make it make it so much harder, because they're enmeshed in like one kind of harmful belief system or another, or you want to shoot you down for one reason or another. And but nevertheless, it's always important not to lose sight of the fact that love is definitely here and is definitely present, and it's something that can be built on, and it can continue to grow and continue to spread. And one aspect of spreading love, which, if we're saying the root of the problem is a deficiency in love, well, then to address the problem from the root, and the antidote to this overall problem, right, or underlying problem, is more love, right? More to spread love, and that looks like different things. It's obviously, helping people out around you, and all of those acts of kindness do add up and make the world at least better than it would be, right? But then there's also, no one should limit themselves to just more microcosmic acts of kindness, right? Where it's like you can also perhaps influence or positively, affect thousands of people's lives or millions of people's lives. Who knows, right? So, and part of the, a very big part of spreading love is to also expose injustices, because again, it's not only right. If you put yourself in this being's shoes, once again, you probably see not only see all the bullies, but then also the people who support the bullies and work for bullying institutions and prop up a bully system, or ideologically support one wing of a mass murderous empire or another, and keep it going, right? And so it's if you're really going to try to align yourself to a love principle, then once again that becomes radical very fast, because the system itself is based on a lie. Right, the system of governments and mega corporations and banks and think tanks wielding so much power in the world, their whole construct is based on a lie, the lie of superiority of certain people over others, the lie of the of unequal rights between human beings. And the same friend I was talking to said, well, if we could only reach a consensus on a few things, right, on who gets to count as a human being, right, and a consensus among a critical mass, right, it would never be 100% consensus. But she was saying, if we could ever reach a critical mass, a consensus among a critical mass of who gets to count as a human being, what human beings need, and what human rights are, essentially, or how to coexist, without enslaving each other. And I think that is a very good breakdown of what we would actually need to reach a consensus on among a critical mass. And these things are actually very simple. And we really already know, or should know, the answer to all those three questions, right? Like, who gets to count as a human being? Well, human beings are human beings. You're not more of a human being because you're of a certain skin color, of a certain gender, of a certain ethnicity or religion or nationality. You don't have the right to subjugate and dominate, harm people, and treat people like they're less human than you, right? And what so yeah, who gets to count as a human being? What do human beings need, right? So it's like, well, obviously we need food, water, shelter, and clothes and things of that nature. We need, like, maybe also certain tools, right, to be able to procure those things. But overall food, water, shelter, but also love, right? Also human connection. So, but then it's like, okay, well, the third question is like, okay, what is a human right? Because that also helps us answer, well, how do we acquire the things we need, and how is that done exactly at a societal level? Because then what happens is we get divided along left and right when we come to different answers around how can people get what they need, and how should coexistence, what should it look like? But what I said to her is I totally agree with her, and that I think part of the reason why a big part of the reason why we can't reach a consensus on those things is because we're divided left and right. And, also atheist, religious, and all the subdivisions within that. And, there's so many different types of religion. There's so many different types of right-wing ideologies, left-wing ideologies. So we're divided, but then also subdivided within all those categories. And we can't seem to reach a consensus on these very basic questions, or the answers to these questions, largely as a result of that ideological division. And the whole system, though, is based on a lie, in the sense that the people do not own themselves within the contract of government itself. People are not self-owning within the logic of the system. They don't have the right to actually consent for what they do with their own bodies. That consent is obliterated by the system. And it's all, the economic system and the political system both destroy people's free will, bodily autonomy, right? And that is just baked into the cake of the system. It's not something that you can't. It's not just a question of reforming it to make the system better. At the root, it is based on the lie of someone having the right to rule over someone else. And of course, that's, if you come to that understanding, that is also very daunting, because it's like, it's not a quick fix. It's not something that we can just elect someone new in and they're going to change it for the better. Like, if the whole root of such a system is based in a lie, then to ever get to a freer and more just world from here, we'd have to address the lie at the root of the system, and address the root of the lie within our own worldview, and change it, and transform ourselves, and in so doing transform the world. Now, not everyone obviously has to transform themselves that much compared to who they really are in their essence, but there is nevertheless a lot of ideological rapture where people are maybe inadvertently condoning things that they actually wouldn't, that aren't consistent with their heart-based intelligence. For example, whether you're left wing or right wing, as long as your worldview is such that government itself is perceived as necessary and legitimate, your worldview is rooted in authority or superiority, however you want to put that. But it's this premise that someone has the right to rule over someone else and pass laws that apply to their bodies without their consent, and forcibly extract their labor, and threaten, fines and harassment and abduction and caging and violence to force people to pay up, right? So that is embedded within government itself. That is embedded within, in a different way, that's also the coercion. The coercion is also embedded in the economic system itself. Of course, there's really no separation from the governmental system and the economic system, in the sense that they're mutually reinforcing in this world, and they've the mega corporations and mega banks of the world have, of course, teamed up with governments to enforce this whole paradigm. And what I'm driving at again is that left and right are not actually an innate natural divide. That's not the eternal question that's always been here with us since the dawn of humanity, and always will be here with us. The true question is freedom or slavery. That is a real question that has always been with us, as far as how should we coexist. Should we honor consent? Should we honor equal rights? Or should we say some people have more rights than others? Should we say some people have the right to coerce and violate and use violence and deception to hijack, free will and bodily and destroy bodily autonomy? In other words, abuse or kindness, respect or a total lack of respect of people's humanity and their inherent freedom, the fact that they were made to be free, and that no one is the rightful slave of anyone else. So that is not an artificial or manufactured divide, freedom or slavery. That is actually, there is a real world difference, and always has been, in terms of what that behavior looks like. And when we do honor each other's, right to say no, or right to consent for what they do with their own bodies, like, when we honor that does create freedom, that does create peace, that does create justice, right? And we can observe that and know that. We don't have to believe anything. It's just observable that abuse creates trauma, in other words. And when you don't abuse people, well, you're not adding to that overall negativity in the world. But anytime someone does abuse someone else, they're just adding to that weight, becoming another brick in the wall. But also, as we condone it, right, and as we apologize for it and try to explain it away and justify it, we become a brick in the wall too. And I think a lot of people, against their true conscience have been led astray to think that there is some sort of governmental authority-based solution, and yet are ignoring the fact that at the root of that is still this premise that some people get to rule over others, which is what racism is based on, sexism, religious fanaticism, or any kind of ideology posing that, or positing that one group of people should have the right to rule over another group of people. And this is the ingredient that needs to be uprooted within the worldview among a critical mass of people. And that shouldn't be a controversial thing to say, except what makes it controversial is that so many people's ideologies are rooted in authority to this day, and the whole political spectrum of right and left is just taking for granted that there needs to be a government in the first place, and that there needs to be someone in a position of authority over someone else, or else all hell would break loose. But that's what that's saying, is that people don't have the right to consent for what they do with their own bodies, and that is going to make the world safer, when clearly that is what makes the world so unsafe. So this belief in authority, this belief in some people's right to rule over others and, dominate them through coercion and violence or deception, right? This belief, it's so widespread, actually. And a lot of it is kind of maybe a more passive belief, not an active, deliberate belief that you want that. But it's just already baked into the cake of the ideology that you might have been met with from a young age, and maybe no one made it very clear when they were, telling you why you should be this or that in fact people's bodily autonomy is not even factored into this worldview. And, part of why people do often cling to worldview and do not want to change it is, coming from the fact that it is something that gets lodged inside our minds and hearts at a young age. And it can be intimidating to break free from that and go against the group. It's no different from growing up in, say, a religious family, and you don't believe in what they're saying, and you want to challenge what is being said, but also may fear going against it, and the fact that they'll ostracize you or try to belittle you or discredit you, and your family could gang up on you, or same in a workplace or in a classroom or a friend group. There's fear to go against the group. And so it's like, if you grow up in a certain family that's conservative, or you might you would likely have this psychological incentive to stay loyal to this ideology in order to fit in within this group. But the thing is, everyone seems to know this when it comes to someone else. It's like everyone seems to agree that, those folks over there are brainwashed. But actually getting brainwashed in this world is it happens to the best of us. Really the question is, who hasn't been brainwashed in any way? Who is spared of all of the brainwashing altogether? I don't know if you could live in this world and be. So the process of trying to undo certain programming is really it's something that it's a shared responsibility. It's not like someone needs to be singled out or feel like, everything, they're the only one or something that has been misled. Because, we have very monopolized channels when it comes to media, obviously. We have very monopolized, social and cultural inputs when it comes to education. And learning about history and learning about various things and not learning about other things, and other things being omitted from a state-curated education that is designed with an outcome-based, mindset, that we are trying to mold citizens into a certain kind of protocol and behavior, and the education is designed to accomplish that, rather than something that is more conversational, something that is engaging with the free will of the one who is learning something, or in the student-teacher dynamic, it's like the teacher is passing on a certain protocol that they were subjected to, and also that they have to like carry out, or else their job is on the line and stuff. So you have to prepare your students for exam, and if they all fail, your job becomes destabilized. So it's like, okay, better teach everything that this state curated curriculum is having me teach, in order to conform to this certain societal standard. And so much programming gets passed on inadvertently in that sense. Of course, there are those who deliberately brainwash and deceive others as well, but so much deception is passed on not even wittingly. It's just like, well, someone buys into something that's untrue and then passes it on without even necessarily knowing it. But there is, everyone seems to know, like, the world can't change unless enough people also change. So this willingness to grow has to be there, right? Unfortunately, it is there for some people, but it's also lacking. There's also a lack of accountability in this world as well, a lack of a willingness to grow and evolve. And many have said that our experience on Earth is like a soul school, right? And that we are here to grow and evolve. And it's no one is perfect. You can't expect perfection. But what you can hope for is that people will be accountable and learn from things they do, and will be willing to evolve over time. And to the extent that dynamic is present, then an overall evolution in our collective reality becomes more plausible. But obviously, it takes a lot of people willing to question even themselves, which is something a whole lot of people apparently are not willing to do. But if it's true that the innate dialectic is not right or left, but rather freedom or slavery, coercion or consent, etc., then doesn't it behoove the average person to ask themselves, well, is my worldview aligned with the principle of consent? Is my worldview aligned with this principle of love and equal rights? Because government itself is not aligned with that principle of equal human rights, because some people have the right to tax others, some people don't have the right to tax others. Some people have the right to say, you can't cross this imaginary line across this entire geographical region of Earth. Other people don't have the right. Some people have the right to, threaten caging and violence to people who put substances in their own bodies that are deemed illegal. Other people don't have that right. Some people are, have the right to wage war. Other people don't have the right. So some people have the right to institute military drafts. You must fight in the war that I declare. Other people don't have that right. So this is a moral double standard that is at the root of this whole entire power structure, and the economic system as well. This whole corporate capitalist paradigm is also rooted in domination. It's just like, this is at the root of it. We have to heal this belief in authority, belief in supremacy. And when people say authority, sometimes they mean knowledge, expertise, decision making, protection, all these things that have nothing to do with the authority claimed by those in positions of power over others, the authority to forcibly extract labor, the authority to enforce various laws that apply to people's bodies against their will. So, such authority is a claim of ownership over people. Say, you must give me substantial sums of your earnings or else I'll throw you in a cage. You may not cross this imaginary line across this entire continent, or else you could be thrown in a cage. Right? Like, what, you don't have the right to say that to your neighbor. You would be a bully if you enforce that on your fellow human beings. Said, you must give me 30 or 40% of your lifelong earnings, or I'll come and put you in a cage. Right? So why is right or wrong considered one thing, but interpersonally between us, but then something else entirely when it comes to humanity at large and how society should function? It's like, well, we should throw out the right to consent for what you do with your own body, your inherent freedom and sovereignty as an earthling. We should throw all that out in favor the authority of people in power over the people who are under their rule. Even though interpersonally it's like, hey, that's abusive. That's you're enslaving someone. So this double standard is so present in the worldview of so many people. Right, that someone should have the right to enforce obedience to whatever their dictates happen to be, use violence to do it. That is what government itself is based on, and so many are taking it for granted that that's necessary. But it's like, okay, but do you not see that you're part of the problem then? Because your ideology is also rooted in domination. And domination is the essence of the problem. Right? This lack of love is the essence. So are we not feeding into it by basing our worldview on that very dynamic? And, anyone who looks at the history of the history of what has taken place could come to understand that this is an ancient battle. This has been going on a very long time, and unfortunately, although many good people have existed and tried to stop one genocidal campaign or another, there just hasn't been enough unity among enough people to actually stop it. So somehow or another, all this evil madness has been allowed to continue, and many people try to stop it, but somehow or another, their efforts weren't enough to actually stop it, or there just weren't enough people that dedicated themselves to stopping it. And so this accumulated, this accumulation of negligence to the negligence to stop such a spirit from spreading has fed into the world as we know it, and has and so can't we look at history and learn all the things that we shouldn't do? It's like, now we can at least know what happens when you take that wrong turn, and it's like, at some point, will enough people ever just honor the fact that human beings are made to be free? Period. That no one owns anyone else, that no one is the rightful ruler of anyone else, that this is all just delusion. Just looking over my notes here. And I think one thing that comes up is, when having this conversation, then people might say, okay, well, if government isn't legitimate, then what is, what are you, quote unquote? What are you, an anarchist? And for some people, that word just sounds like some other ideology that they have to buy into, and some other ism, and something else that's just constructed in the minds of someone or invented by someone. It's like, okay, well, that's just some other ideology, some other thing that you're trying to like rope me into. But again, if this question of freedom versus slavery is the eternal question as far as how we should coexist, then a worldview that acknowledges that and chooses freedom, it's not just some ideology that was invented by someone few hundred years ago or something, right? It's a it would actually constitute a philosophy, right? In the sense that philosophy means love of wisdom. You could actually prove with evidence that that a worldview is wiser because people are free with it. If enough people live by according to a certain kind of mindset, and acknowledging the inherent freedom and bodily autonomy of others, right? That produces justice and peace and freedom, whereas destroying consent and subjugating people, that creates chaos and mayhem. So it's just very interesting that a word like anarchy, which is of course associated within so many people's minds with chaos and everything, is actually, all it means is without rulers. It just means like no one owns anyone else. No one has the right to be the slave master of anyone else. And let's live according to that principle instead. And that is not just some ideological trap that someone's trying to get you enmeshed in, like some new belief system, like you have to believe something and you can't know it or prove it. It's like, no, we can actually know and prove that no one is the rightful property of anyone else. So why can't we coexist from there and acknowledge that reality and within our worldview? And if you want to call it abolition or freedom or anarchism or whatever, that's secondary. But yeah, there are certain words that do acknowledge that reality. And it's not just something for society at large. It's moment to moment. Right? Justice is something to be practiced in real time. It's like, do we own each other or not? Do we have the right to like threaten violence to make someone obey us? It's just like, you must do this or else I'm going to, come and beat the shit out of you. Is that the way we should coexist? Is that morally sound? So coming back to what my friend said, right? If we could reach a consensus on who gets to count as a human being, well, I hope. Well, let's go. I was going to say, I hope we don't have to like go through that, but apparently we do, because we have still not reached a consensus among a critical mass on who gets to count as a human being. And so, that has to be addressed. Like that we're not, no one has more rights than another. No one has special powers or the right to rule over others because of this ethnicity or religion or skin color. It's like all of that is just fabrication, right? Reach a consensus on what human beings need. Okay, yeah, we need certain things to survive, and also human connection, love, right? And we have the right to pursue those things without being restrained and limited by the prejudice and authoritarian dogma of others. And reaching consensus on, the way she articulated it, reaching consensus on how to live peaceably amongst each people who have differences from you without resorting to violence. I myself would condense that as just how to, I mean, that's a good way to say it too. But another way to say is how to coexist while acknowledging our equal human rights and respect, each other's inherent freedom. And if within one's worldview, some people who are obviously human beings are not counted as human beings. Some people, within your worldview, it's like, we all need water, but someone should just have the right to monopolize all this water at the expense of others. Or, people need food, but some people should just have to be enslaved to others to ever eat. Obviously that's a very dogmatic belief system. And you're not treating others how you would want to be treated, right? And then if within the worldview, it's like, well, how to live while, acknowledging equal human rights and how to coexist peaceably without resorting to violence. Not to be confused with self-defense as a response to that initiation of violence. Well, if we're gonna ever reach a consensus on equal human rights and how to live peaceably amongst people who aren't all the same without resorting to violence, we have to address the fact that all ideologies promoting government itself are ignoring the reality that, resorting to violence to enforce obedience is not the solution and is not okay. And that's just how government itself functions, with threats of harm to enforce obedience. And that just starts with how governments raise all their funds to pay for all their projects, but then it escalates from there. But equal rights are not respected within the contract that people are born into under this this capitalist nor governmental system, the economic or political system. And it's not only a question of this economic system or that, but any economic system, whether it's coming from the left or right, that is, again, rooted in authority, is not respecting this. So can we not have some accountability in addressing that if one finds that ingredient within one's own worldview, that someone should have the authority to dominate another? Because, it's a dog-eat-dog world and that's just how it is, and there has to be the capitalist class that exploits the labor of their slaves and subjects, and that's just the law of the jungle, and or whether the excuse is something else for why someone should have the authority to rule over the lives of others. All these excuses are made up of why that should be the case, and it's like, maybe it was just all these belief systems were lodged in our brains at a young age, and now it's hard to undo that because now we have to face the pain of maybe having been wrong or taken wrong turns and said foolish things or done foolish things based on those erroneous belief systems, and don't want to have to face ourselves in such an honest way. But without that accountability, it's like, how can we expect to co-create something fair? So with that said, I guess I'll conclude this video. Thanks for tuning in.